Hi, Caitlin. I wanted to give you some feedback on your week one writing assignment. First off, your formatting looks pretty good. Your heading looks good. Over here with your header, don't forget to include your last name along with the page number. So you want to include both those items here. You have a little bit of a gap in between your heading and your title. In MLA, you don't need to use extra spacing. So you've already set it up to be double spaced. So just indent once and then you can begin typing. Um, as a whole, I think that this is working. I think that you have identified the main idea. I think that you're bringing in evidence to support the main idea, and that I like the fact that you are kind of working out a beginning claim here, as in, well, not as in, but what you're recognizing is the claim is clear, but it's only really going to work for certain audiences. And I think that that's a fair point to make. And I think that if you want to stick with Orwell, that could potentially be um, a a claim to make, right? That could essentially be your argument to make that the point is effective for some audiences, but perhaps not all, right? So let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that are going on here. So first off, you set up your signal phrase well. You include the author's full name along with the title. You don't need to both italicize and put quotation marks around the title. This is how you tell the difference. In MLA, longer works are always italicized and shorter works are in quotation marks. So longer works that should be italicized would be things like books, the titles of magazines like 17 or Vogue. But shorter works would be in quotation marks. So chapters in books would be in quotation marks. Articles in 17 magazine would be in quotation marks. And short stories like George Orwell's A Hanging would be in quotation marks. So you say that it is obvious that Orwell is trying to make a case against capital punishment. In summary, I would go ahead and take this phrase out because you're moving away from objectivity into your position. And it might not be obvious for all readers, right? It might be obvious to you, but not all readers. So I think a stronger way to say this is throughout the story, Orwell is trying to make a case against capital punishment. And then your job is then to show the main ideas, the main moments in the text that seem to suggest that is indeed his main idea. And I think that you are starting to do this, right, with these key ideas that you bring in. If this was a fully realized paper, I think that you would want to explain these in more depth. So taking a look at that announcement that I wrote describing, or that I created describing the pie structure, would be really useful for you here because you got the right idea. It's just in this format they're kind of underdeveloped. As I said before, I like what you're saying here, and I think that this could potentially be a good idea for a thesis if you wanted to write about this. Yeah, and this is a really interesting thing that you bring into the text, and something I think to play along with that, we say in this country, always innocent until proven guilty, right? But is that truly what we believe? Because if someone is arrested, we already assume that they've done something wrong. And I think this conversation that you talk about here illustrates that idea. But we have evidence that that's not always the case. Many people have been falsely imprisoned. People have been wrongly executed and were later exonerated. But, unfortunately, after it was, or tragically, really, I should say, before it was too late. So I wonder if one of the things that you want to interrogate here, if you use this idea, is, I don't know, what kind of assumptions we have about justice and how we kind of take those assumptions for granted. So and I like that you're talking about the lack of evidence on what the prisoner has done helps to support Orwell's idea, but perhaps that will only work for some readers. I think there is enough evidence in here to suggest that he doesn't appear like a dangerous, guilty person. So I think bringing those moments into the text would be a good way to support that idea. Here's one final thing that I want to point out to you. If you discuss that, make sure that you really identify who these stakeholders are. So what I mean is you're going to have to use language like people who support supporters of capital punishment, or groups that oppose capital punishment. And Americans are, if you look at the data on this, Americans are pretty much divided 50-50. And I bet you can kind of guess that they're divided along party lines as well. So what I want you to do then is make this like kind of personal example become more concrete. Here's one more thing I want to point out to you. This being said, that's a really informal transition, and it's something that we use all the time in verbal communication, but it's not necessarily something that you want to include in formal situations like writing scenarios. So just aim for more formal transitions here. So there, I would say something like, therefore, it was enough for Orwell to tell the story how he did. And that's going to be a much stronger sounding sentence. But as a whole, I think you're playing around with some interesting ideas here. And if you write about Orwell, I'm gonna look forward to seeing where you take this thing.